last choir of the season. We can give them a little applause. I want to give you my thanks for your great attitudes this past 14 months, as every Wednesday we have thrown something new and different at you all, and you have been just terrific and done it with a good spirit and have continued to provide such beautiful music to enhance our worship together. The choir, this is the plan, if all goes according to plan, the choir will return to worship next September the 12th. We're designating that, there we go, Homecoming Sunday. And Ryan has some very special music planned, and we hope to have almost all of these folks back. And I believe you're going to have an opportunity to hear Renee in recital at least one more time. We'll get that information out. She's going to do a farewell recital for us, probably right here in this bay, right here. So that will be coming soon. Choir members that are traveling anywhere this summer, go in safety and go in peace, and know that we will really look forward to seeing you back next fall. When's your first rehearsal? September 1st. They got it. All right. There is this oft-quoted saying of Gandhi's about which I have grown more and more ambivalent the older I get. The saying goes like this: I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. My growing ambivalence stems from the fact that either Gandhi is right and we have completely missed the boat on this whole Christianity thing, or Gandhi is wrong and our modern practice of the way of Jesus is spot on and he just doesn't get it. I mean, he packs an awful lot of judgment in that one pithy little phrase, doesn't he? I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. He's basically telling about 1/3 of the world's population that he doesn't like us and that our interpretation of the way of Christ is way off mark. He might have a point. It often seems that the status of our faith may have missed the mark in regards to how we ought to live. And I'm curious how this came to be. So today marks the first Sunday of Robin's sabbatical. We wished her well last week, and I know she's off. She's actually, I don't know if you saw her book bag for all of her reading. She's got a lot of work that she's got to do. It's also the first Sunday of our new sermon series, The Way of Jesus, the other side of the story. I thought it might be helpful during our season of sabbatical to reflect on the roots of our faith and how this thing called Christianity actually came to be. And not only that, but also explore how we then live that faith in the world and how we have ordered our lives to be Christian. I got a question for you. What really happened after Jesus? What really happened after the Christ event? We don't know. There are no video recordings or audio recordings. Most of our written documents from that time are copies of copies of copies. So a lot of what we've had to do is pull it out of the existing documents and then the history of the church. So we have these copies of documents, and then we try and glean, and we glean from them in concert, and then what happens is that becomes the tenets of our faith. Now here at the beginning, I have found it very helpful to make a key distinction. When we talk about Jesus Christ, we're actually talking about two distinct understandings. The first is the Jesus of history, a man who taught a new way for us to be in the world, a new way of life and of living, a man who gathered disciples around him to teach about this new way and then to help spread the way throughout the entire world. That is the Jesus of history, the Jesus of Nazareth. Now, the other division is what we like to call Big C Christianity. I sometimes call this corporate Christianity or cultural Christianity. Big C Christianity is Christ, Constantine, Christendom, Calvin, and Christian America. I add corporate Christ. It is the church. And what the church then has done with Jesus and Jesus' teachings. Here's the big C story. Got to get this out there appropriately. You ready? Jesus came to earth to save us, but he founded the church instead. That church suffered under Roman persecution until the Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal. With its new status, the Christian religion spread throughout Europe, where popes and kings formed a society they called Christendom, which was run by the Catholic Church and was constantly threatened by Muslims, witches, and heretics. There were wars and there were inquisitions. When people had enough, they rebelled and they became Protestants, their main leader being John Calvin, who was a great theologian but a killjoy. Eventually, Calvin's heirs, the Puritans, left Europe to set up a Christian society in the New World. The United States of America then became the most important Christian nation in the world, a beacon of faith and democracy. Many thanks to Diana Butler Bass for that pithy little bit of history there. It's from her book, A People's History of Christianity. The other side of the story, this is the book I'm basing our work on this summer. That is the story of corporate Christianity. At its most basic, it teaches that if you find the right branch of the correct denomination, of the proper division of Christianity, then your place in heaven is assured, and you may live out the rest of your life in peace because you have it all figured out. It is that easy. And yet, that is not the way for me. That is not the way of Jesus for me. That is a way of Jesus, one interpretation. My understanding leads more towards the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth and not towards this stack of doctrinal beliefs that I must profess before I can claim the title Christian. Now, we know it's difficult for those of us who lean towards the Jesus of history rather than Jesus the Christ. As one famous French Catholic theologian put it, the primary dilemma of contemporary religion is the loss and the reconstruction of memory. So how we remember the Jesus event reflects on how we build our foundations for our faith. And who wants to be part of a faith system that spurs critics to say disparaging things, like Gandhi's comment about not liking Christians? I mean, it gets so far, it gets to the point where that famous anti-theist, Christopher Hitchens, declares this: religion poisons everything. That's quite a statement. I think that's a statement that should concern all religious people of all faiths. Sociology of religion professor Robert Bellah once said this: communities have a history, and in an important sense, they are constituted by their past. Real community is a community of memory, one that does not forget its past. So if Bella is correct that all communities are actually constituted, are made up of their pasts, then the primary calling of a faith community is to remember. And this is our weekend for remembering. It's a big part of what we do here on Sunday mornings. We remember. We remember the Jesus story, the stories of the disciples, how the church came to be. We remember. We celebrate. We mourn. We forgive. We move on. We try something else. We live together in Christian community. It is our remembrance of Jesus, his apostles, the Christian story, a story that I will remind you that's still being written today, a story that includes everyone in this room. These are the things that drive our faith. I've been told that we here at University Congregational Church practice what is called generative Christianity. a living tradition to reconsider faith as a community of people who practice God's love and God's mercy through time. Generative, lived Christianity cannot be understood in terms of the big C story. Generative, lived Christianity is best experienced as a community that remembers the ways in which Christian people have enacted the great commandment in different times and in different places. You all remember the great commandment, right? Love God, love neighbor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right? If not, I've got a class for you. An honest Christian practice would have that commandment at its core and then base everything it does on fulfilling those two criteria: love God, love neighbor. This is the crux of what Jesus was teaching 2,000 years ago, and we've been trying to get it right ever since. And the church then developed its teachings not around the great commandment, even though they did in the beginning, but instead around how to keep the church, big C, in power. The traditions of the church, big C church, are not so much about Jesus as they are about power, order, your place in the hierarchy. Who belongs? Who can serve? Who can teach? Who can preach? In other words, who matters? One of our very proud grandparents shared their grandchild's confirmation essay with me that they recently completed, the child, and thus were confirmed in the Methodist Church. There was such joy in this young person's writing, but one phrase has stuck with me all week. This is what she wrote, 14-year-old. To me, Jesus is a friend, someone who will always be there for me, and someone who will never judge. This young person has learned of the Jesus of history and his teachings, and has now made a new memory of Jesus that will inform her for the rest of her life. Jesus is a friend. It's a new memory she created, a memory of Jesus. It's a new interpretation of all those old stories. Diana Butler Bass references this in her People's History of Christianity by writing these words: "The Jesus who captures the imagination of generative Christians is Jesus, the religious revolutionary, the one who teaches wisdom and resists the world's domination system to instead preach the kingdom of God. His is not a revolution of militant military victory, rather of humility, hospitality, and love. His teachings are the ones that make a young Wichita call him their friend. And it is these teachings that this community, University Congregational Church, has built its covenant around, and it is what sustains our ministry and our missions. Ever since Albert Schweitzer's classic book, The Quest for the Historical Jesus, ever since that appeared in English in 1910, Protestants have actively pursued this question: who Jesus really was and what Jesus actually said and taught. The difference between the Jesus of history and the Christ taught of by the church and church doctrine is often very difficult for us to discern. Organizations such as the Jesus Seminar, now called Westar, have worked to give this world solid, extensively investigated, and rigorously explored new interpretations of what we believe Jesus of Nazareth actually did and said. Not interpretations or additions of sayings that have been slightly altered throughout the centuries to transfer more power to the church. Power that should instead reside within our love of the Holy One. My very first seminary class on church history was called Early Christianities. Early Christianities. And we spent a significant chunk of time during our first class session discussing why the professor chose the plural of the word, Christianities, as opposed to the singular, Christianity. So everybody, early Christianity, the early church. It was precisely this dedication to those details that led us to understand that there has never been one true monolithic belief system that is called Christianity. Now, the Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches might disagree with me. That's not the only thing they would disagree with me on, by the way. But history shows that even at the height of Roman Catholic and Orthodox power, there were plenty of us heretics around with differing interpretations of what it means to be a Christian, or better yet, what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And why? Why so much human energy spent on this philosophy, this Jesus? Why did his teachings, why did the teachings of this rabble-rousing rabbi from first century Palestine catch the entire world on fire and spread to almost every place on the globe? For me, it tends to settle around this fact. Christianity seems to have succeeded because it transforms the lives of people in a chaotic world. The power of Christianity lay not in its promise of otherworldly compensations for suffering in this life, as often is proposed. The crucial change that takes place, the rapidly spreading awareness of this faith, the faith that delivers powerful antidotes to life's miseries here and now. The way of Jesus offers a new way to look at the world, thus a new way to be in the world. And this way has positive benefit for the followers. Bass reminds us that the way of Jesus with its transformative power challenged the status quo and infuriated ancient defenders of Roman religions, many of whom argued that the new Christian religion was an immoral sect with secretive rites and rituals that undermined traditional Roman values of loyalty and family. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? The way of Jesus is transformative. Jesus, the Christ, is a mender of lives. Jesus, the Christ, is a healer, the great physician who inspired church father Justin Martyr to write, "We who formerly valued above all things the acquisition of wealth and possessions, now bring what we have into a common stock, and we communicate to everyone in need. We who hated and destroyed one another, and on account of their different manners would not live with men of a different tribe, now, since the coming of Christ, live familiarly with them and pray for our enemies." Justin Martyr recognized this new way to be in the world. Instead of being in conflict with each other, as Rome would wish it, because that benefits Rome, we seek common ground in direct opposition to what the Roman authorities expected. Since the very first teachings or doctrines of the church, that's all a doctrine is a teaching, the greatest commandment has actually been at the forefront. In fact, the very first document we have about, you could call it the first training manual for Christianity. It's called the Didache. It looks like D-dash, but it's Didache. And this document begins with some words that are going to be really familiar to you. Now remember, this is the first formal church-authorized teaching manual for teaching the way of Jesus. And here's the words that it says. There are two ways, one of life and one of death, but a great difference between the two ways. The way of life, then, is this. First, you shall love God who made you. Second, love your neighbor as yourself, and do not do to another what you would not want done to you. First century Christians would have taken that to heart and based the rest of their learning and their living and their way of being in the world on that commandment, the two parts of it. I base my theology on those same promises and commandments. But something happened to that foundational teaching, and it grew and grew to be less critical to the Big C church. Instead of focusing our love on God and neighbor, the doctrine, the teaching, began to change it more into a love of church, a love of teaching, a love of priest. Love of God began to take a back seat because the teaching became this. The church represents God on earth, so love the church, and it's just the same as loving God. And we know that's not true. Love of church requires uniformity of belief, and our sincere Protestant hearts bristle at being told what we must believe. So Diana Butler Bass sums up this first chapter of her book in this way. The Great Commandment gives us common ground with the early Christian communities. Not because of any similarity between the ancient world and today, and not because they knew how to be better Christians. They tried to live the way and failed, as many of us do. Yet even in those shortcomings, or I say because of them, we walk the way of Jesus with them. We are in sacred covenant with the early Christian communities and with the Holy One as we all journey together on this way of Jesus. We can organize our lives around a love of God and a love of neighbor. We can embrace the past in a life-affirming manner built on that transformative practice of love rather than doctrinal belief. We might even reimagine some ancient stories for ourselves to give us new insight. We can recapture wisdom from ancient Christianities. As you all practice the way of Jesus in your life today, this week, this summer, this year, be open to this possibility of reimagining these stories, reimagining your memories of Jesus, the early church, early churches. It is in this reimagining of the Holy One's life-affirming dream for us that this congregation, this little community of the faithful, this collection of souls, we might just find a firm foothold as we all walk the way of Jesus together. Amen. The choir, or actually, you're all welcome to sing our closing benediction song 2 times through.